Well, good morning and welcome. My name is George Adamick. I'm the rector here at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Cary, North Carolina, and I'm glad you could join us today for Adult Formation. Before we begin, let's just pause a moment and kind of place ourselves in God's presence. Listen to my homily, the one who has already found us and knows us by name. Let's just pause a moment and pray. Gracious God, you call us to such an intimacy. You've created us, you know us by name. Be with us this day as we discover the mystery of Christ, the thoughts of the universal Christ that Richard Rohr places before us. May we engage with it. May we ask questions of each other as we seek to understand it, and open our hearts and minds to your love and care. And be with this nation. Be with all the nations of the world, and but keep an eye on us this week as we go through such incredible times. And be with us, guide us, let us know that we are cared for you and loved by you, and it is that hope that enables us to move forward. We ask it all in Christ's name. Amen. Well, today is part 2 of a series of the history of Christ. It was part 1 last week, part 2 today. Today what I want to do is share with you 3 brief videos. 2 of them are about 9 minutes each, and another one for about 5 minutes. So it's going to be a lot of videos. In some ways, it gives me a chance to think of this as having some guest speakers in, although they're through video. 2 of the videos, of course, are going to be Richard Rohr, as he expands a little bit on this idea of the universal Christ. And then at the end, a video by Cynthia Bergeau, who is, I'll talk about her later when that video comes on. She'll share some thoughts with us as well. So just a couple of points before we listen to the first video, just about 3 points really. Like you to pay attention to, well, all that he's saying, but he mentioned something that may be a new word for us. He refers to the perennial tradition. The perennial tradition. I'm not sure that's a common thought that you may have heard of before. The perennial tradition is really about the tradition that has gone before us, all of the tradition that we open ourselves to. David Steindl-Rast, another spiritual writer and guide who I follow as well, gave a presentation I was at many years ago. He called it Primordial Religion. It's that religion that is just part of who we are, that has been with us from the beginning of our humanity. You've heard me mention in homilies and classes over the years that we humans are the meaning seekers. We search for meaning. As I've said to folks, we are the ones of creation who seek meaning. We look for it. That St. Augustine line, restless is my heart until it rests in you, O Lord. And that in which we find rest is meaning, and we search for meaning. And I think that's part of our humanity. I think that's our spiritual sense, that search for meaning. Wherever we search for that meaning, but we're all searching for it, and it's what guides us together. So the perennial tradition, in my own interpretation, is all that has fed us to where we are today in the history of this meaning search, this search for meaning. So listen to some of the work on the perennial tradition. I think it's something to listen to, and I find that helpful for me anyway. Number 2, this wonderful insight that Richard offers about East and West. East meaning the Eastern tradition of the church and the Western tradition of the church. We are products of the Western tradition, and he'll talk a little bit about that. But I find that to be a very interesting one, where the West has become much more focused on the rational, whereas the East is much more from the more contemplative side, the more intuitive sense of religion. The West, we're so into writing down our beliefs, our creeds. We recite them, we say them, and they're good. They're good. The East has a different way of understanding that and of being with that. So the difference of East and West. And then thirdly, the idea that that in many ways, the reason this universal Christ is so new to us is that it's a new way of seeing ourselves even from the beginning. The idea that our religious tradition begins with a problem and original sin. Yes, Richard points out, original sin is never mentioned in the Bible. That's something that we've created from our interpretation of some of these stories. So rather than beginning with a problem and the need for a problem solver, what Richard is trying to present is that of a vision creator and the idea of original goodness. So those are three things that, in particular, I invite you to pay attention to, because the video will move by quickly. It's a little over 9 minutes long. So, Neil, if we could share that video right now, that would be great.
Want to call me liberal? I guess that's okay. It's only from their perspective. If they really knew the perennial tradition, and let me chart that, pre-Christian religion, which is already founded in the Bible itself, Judaism, the intertestamental period, the New Testament, the early fathers and mothers of the church, the first 5 centuries, which we call the patristic period, the saints and mystics throughout the 2,000 years. That's the perennial tradition. What you got to do is connect the dots. Now, that's the way I was educated, by the Franciscans in historical theology. Now, once you know that, I promise you this is true. Right hand. I'm not liberal. I'm extremely traditional. But most conservatives are not traditional at all. They just call 1940 Alabama tradition. I'm not trying to put down Alabama, pick any other state. But this won't work anymore. That the way you were raised in the 1950s in California is the whole tradition, huh? The word Catholic was already taken by St. Ignatius of Antioch in the year 108 as he traveled across Asia Minor to be killed in Rome. He went to village after village. 108, Jesus has only been dead 70 years. And he finds every little village is already calling itself followers of Jesus, because they found their dignity. They weren't trying to go to heaven. They found their dignity in this world. And he said, this is going to be a Catholic religion. The word in Greek meaning universal. And that's why that's still in the creed. I believe in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. But we haven't had the one holy undivided church since 1054. In 1054, the West excommunicated the East. The Bishop of Rome excommunicated the Patriarch of Constantinople. He returned the compliment. And we stopped studying one another. So, you good Protestant brothers and sisters came along and reformed us, and we needed it, believe me. I'd be the first to admit that. But one of the reasons we were so corrupt is we had lost the contemplative, universal theology of the Eastern Church. So, unfortunately, I don't mean this in a demeaning or dismissive way, but, Protestantism is trying to reform one half of the piece of the pie, which you could say makes it start with 1/4 of the piece of the pie. And they live inside of that little, arena, think it's the whole arena, and it isn't. So just do your homework, recognize that most of the contemplative teaching and the belief in God, the social notion of salvation. God was saving history. God was saving humanity. God was saving reality, not just a few individuals. That's all in the Eastern Church. And that wasn't even a beginning point for most Protestants. It was, by the time you get to Luther and Calvin, God bless them, they're doing the best they can. But we've got a rather negative anthropology. Poor Luther speaks of the human nature being a pile of manure. He really does. When you start with a negative anthropology, that we're a pile of manure covered with the snow that is Christ, it doesn't work. You can have all the positive theology you want in the world, but when you're told, forgive me, you're full of shit, and that takes the form in Calvin of a doctrine of total depravity. You know I'm not making this up. Read your sources. Total depravity. So what we're doing in the universal Christ is basing our theology where we should have based it all the time in Genesis 1, not Genesis 3. Genesis 3 starts with the problem. I challenge you to go back and read Genesis 1. It was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good. 5 times. I just checked it again yesterday, so I wouldn't misquote myself. Then after saying it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good 5 times, it adds a 6th. It was very good. How did we lose such a visionary, optimistic alpha point? How you begin is where you're going to end, really, and how you unfold. And for some pernicious reason, I think human beings like to solve problems. And we like to see ourselves and even Jesus as a mere problem solver instead of a vision creator. What I'm talking about is the eternal Christ as a vision creator, not a problem solver. But we got obsessed with someone eating an apple between the Tigris and Euphrates River somewhere 4,000 years ago, and let the whole storyline of the cosmos, which had already existed 13.6 billion years, now depend upon an apple. I know I'm making a caricature, but I've got to do it because this is silly. This won't work. And you young millennials are having the honesty to see that this isn't big enough. We have to have a God who's at least as big as the universe. And now the Hubble telescope tells us not only is the universe still expanding, and it has been expanding for 13.6 billion years from some beginning point, which I would call the touch of God. There's no difference between evolution and creationism. That was dualistic thinking that created that problem. So we had meaning, beauty, goodness from the beginning. And yet we took our eyes off of that and obsessed about Adam and Eve and created a word that wasn't even in the Bible. And we Catholics did that, original sin, and circled the whole agenda around how do we get rid of this original sin that was passed on, which only reminded human beings of what they already tend to believe too much, that I'm no good. I mean, do you know a single human being that doesn't think they're unworthy, even if they're trying to cover it up, even if they're trying to brag and get a lot of press? You always know it's overcompensation for a negative self-image. And here we were given a positive, totally positive self-image from the beginning. Genesis 1:26, let us create in the image and in our own image and likeness. My God, that's good stuff. That everything our eyes have ever seen is created in the image and likeness of God. We now live in a universe where the problem is solved at the beginning. In fact, so much so there is no problem. Now we still have to account for human perversity and human evil, and I don't want to be naive about that. But we became so obsessed with accounting for evil that we dismissed the original goodness. So in the book, I'm not sure, do I call it original blessing? Or I think I call it original goodness. You can call it whatever you want, but it better be positive. Yeah, original goodness, chapter 4. Um, it really is perverse that we chose not to see that.
For those of you who weren't able to be with us last week, I may have forgotten to mention that what we're looking at really is some of the thoughts of Richard Rohr in his book, The Universal Christ. And he held it there at the end of that video. I highly recommend this book. It is really thought-provoking and challenging. Want to just offer a couple reflections on what we just heard. There's an awful lot. I wish we could all just chat a bit about this idea, but I hope it gives you just a different perspective, a different way of maybe understanding ourselves and our tradition. When we speak as Anglicans, we're in the Anglican household of the Christian tradition and the Episcopal tradition here in the United States. When we speak of the three-legged stool, we talk about scripture, tradition, and reason. For me, that tradition, it includes that perennial tradition that Richard talks about. I think there's a richness there in what we've captured. He speaks about the East and the West and the differences in our what we've taken and focused on throughout history. You know, the church was the Christian tradition was one until about the year 1000. I think it was 1054, around that time. And there was this divide between East and West, and he refers to that in this in what he talked about. And one of the things that I find attractive of the Episcopal tradition, the Anglican tradition in my own life as a way to feed me and nourish me in this journey is that we are. Rich talks about, you know, the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. Interesting thing about our tradition as Anglicans is that we are both Protestant and Catholic. We are truly the non-dualistic tradition within Christianity. We're not either or. We're not one or the other. We're both and, which a little history here was the great gift of Queen Elizabeth I, the Via Media. We are both of those together. And so just in our tradition, our language, in Christianity, I talk about the Orthodox tradition, the Roman Catholic tradition, the Protestant tradition, and the Anglican tradition. We different households within Christianity. And one of the interesting things about our tradition in this journey in the perennial tradition is that all of the creeds that we have in our Book of Common Prayer, the creeds that we proclaim in our liturgy, are all creeds and only creeds from previous to the East and West separation in the year 1000. We hold on to that time of being one, that time of more of a unity. And so all of our creeds before the time, anything that has come from the church after 1000, we certainly will see it as helpful to one's piety and spiritual journey. But it's those creeds from the time before 1000 that it's what we say on Sundays, the Nicene Creed, and others. And so we hold on to that intuitive as well as that rational sense of our tradition. We are Anglican, and one of the great discoveries I had in my journey to the Episcopal Church was one of the priests who was mentoring me saying that we are, of all the Western traditions, we are very much at home with the Eastern tradition, with the Orthodox tradition. In the Episcopal tradition, the Anglican communion, we are much more comfortable with mystery. We're comfortable with that. We don't need to have everything defined. Some traditions, everything has to be creedal. We have to have it figured out, to agree with it or not agree with it. We're much more comfortable with, we're still discovering. As God is discovering us, as we are being found by God, we are discovering who we are, and we are comfortable with mystery. So just want to offer those thoughts to you as we gather as a household of Episcopalians, and how we hear, what this message Richard is giving us, which I think is very rich, very deep, and truly, truly enriching to us all. So I find it very, very helpful, as we go forward. And that idea of original sin and original goodness, boy, that would, if that's not a game changer, it would. So what a different story we tell if we live from that sense of original goodness, and lived our lives as, continuing, creating the vision that God has for creation. So the second video, this is the second video I want to show you, but before we play it, just a couple of points that I want to highlight, as you listen to Richard Rohr speak. First, Richard talks about, and this is not an original thought to this Universal Christ book, he's shared this before, and I've shared it too in homilies, that connection between Christianity and the Roman Empire. Remember, Constantine was the emperor who finally accepted Christianity as the religion of the empire. And history tells that in different ways. History tells that in some ways as finally we were accepted. We were the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, and that's how we grew and expanded. Some will suggest that that may have been a hindrance to Christianity. We went, some say it may have been one of the most difficult times in Christianity, most challenging times. It set us back. A wonderful image was, we as Christians went from the catacombs, secretly hidden away because of oppression. We went from there to the basilica. The basilica then being the place of the Roman emperor, where the leaders of Christianity sat in thrones next to the emperor. You want to lose the influence of Jesus on the Beatitudes, sit next to the emperor. As the emperor says, teaching the Beatitudes, leaders begin to say, well, maybe that's not exactly what Jesus meant. You begin to, power has a great influence. And that had a great influence on Christianity in its early history. And that's a whole subject we could study, but he points that out, this idea of Christianity and the Roman Empire and the influence that had. Another point is the Enlightenment and rational thinking, how religion perhaps became so limited to the rational, to this radar up here, and the intuitive or the contemplative kind of became background, but the rational became so strong, and he'll talk about that. And he also gives a wonderful kind of description of religion, that religion is meant to reconnect. It's from the Latin religio, to reconnect things and not separate and divide things. But how do we, and that this idea of the universal Christ being not so much something that a particular group of people own, and if you believe in Jesus, then you can own it too. This is a different theology. This is that Jesus came to show forth this universal love, this universal care, that being part of this wondrous creation. So let's listen to this second video, Neil, and we'll connect again after it.
By the 14th century, Western civilization had become so, well, I should say the Roman Catholic Church had so united itself with the Roman Empire and thereby become imperialistic, exclusionary, violent, despite the nonviolent teaching of Jesus, that we read everything pretty dualistically, for me or against me, a part of our religion or not. Everything was either or thinking. That's why we desperately did need the Reformation. But the only trouble is the Reformation was even more dualistic. They didn't solve the central problem. It was argumentative, It was either or thinking. Now they were burdened with proving that the Lutheran reform or any other reform was 100% right, and those stupid Catholics were 100% wrong. You can't kill your mother. You understand? You can't kill the past. In our living school, we've learned so much from Ken Wilber and his wonderful phrase, include and transcend. The more you can include, the more you transcend. But we weren't able to think that way. We thought exclude and enlighten. So we were always excluding the previous centuries, the other groups, the other religions. We became largely an exclusionary religion. Then that becomes so much the way of looking at reality that right after the much needed Protestant Reformation, don't get me wrong, but it was just too limited and too dualistic, we have the strangely called phenomenon called the Enlightenment. Now that's largely identified with the 17th and 18th century, where especially in German-speaking countries, English-speaking countries, and French-speaking countries, people become very rational. And thank God for it. It created the medical revolution, the scientific revolution, engineering, science, all the other things we benefit from today. But it became so enamored with the rational mind that it eliminated what now so many books are coming out on this, what was considered the superior mind. Even Einstein says this, the intuitive, the symbolic mind, the, we would call it the spiritual mind, which basically, let me define it this way. It saw things in wholes, not in parts. It didn't just see the rational part of it. It didn't exclude the rational, but there's more to you being rational. There's more to me being rational. And the examples I usually use are whenever you talk about any notion of love or death or suffering or God or infinity or sexuality, you better have a bigger mind than the rational mind. Because basically what you'll do is close down. Can't process this. Try to process love. And how many of you have given your whole life to love your wife, thank God, huh? And you're saying, this is stupid. Why am I giving my whole life for one woman? It's not rational. Neither is sexuality. But we've lost the ability to process these more important aspects of the human person because we eliminated the intuitive mind, the spiritual mind, the non-rational mind. And don't equate non-rational with irrational. Can you hear the difference? I'm not interested in being irrational, but I'm very open to being non-rational. In other words, another access point than linear logic. Linear logic is wonderful if you're an engineer. Linear logic is necessary if you're a doctor. But if you're going to guide the soul, you better have another access point. That's what religion lost. Basically, Owen Barfield says for the last 5 centuries. He calls Owen Barfield was the spiritual father of J.R.R. Tolkien, T.S. Eliot, and C.S. Lewis. No less thinkers than these, And he says the last 5 centuries have been the desert of non-participation. It's a fancy word, but human beings did not feel they were participating inherently in the universe or in God or in others' lives. We were all isolated automatons, robots walking around. That's America today. There's little sense of communion. There's little sense of connection. The desert of non-participation. So that's why he encouraged T.S. Eliot and J.R. to write in symbolic form, in poetic form. You see, because he knew they could awaken a different mind. And that's why so many people are fascinated by their poetry and their writing. So forgive that long answer, but we're coming out of a period of intense rational thinking and individualistic understanding of ourselves. Once you're rational and autonomous, the Richard self is operating here, disconnected from you, disconnected from the animals, disconnected from the universe, and therefore disconnected from God. I'm going to just say it. You don't have religion anymore. The very word religio, I had to study Latin for 6 years, is to religament, reconnect. Well, we aren't reconnected, we're disconnected from our neighbor, from other races, from other religions, certainly from the animals. I just read this weekend, if this isn't a stupid example, Descartes, the French Enlightenment teacher, who's often called the father of rationalism by some people, that he practiced, I even hate to talk about it, vivisection of animals, which means torture of living animals, right? Because he said they are just machines. They said you could hear the screams of the animals. He would make sure not to kill them, but simply to cut them while they were still alive, so his mind could understand the living animal. He basically validated the whole idea of vivisection, the torturing of living human beings, because they were not rational. So anything that wasn't rational, and the irony is we end up being the ones irrational, torturing animals so I can know something. I think, therefore I am. You know that's his philosophy, cogito ergo sum. So this is why religions at the higher levels try to get us disconnected from this control tower. I am more than my thinking. I am more than the top 3 inches of my body, which is what we've been trapped in. Forgive me, I know I'm trying to make this probably too simple, but I'm really not, I don't think. I want ordinary people to realize the prison we're trying to come out of. And we've been in a major prison, which is, look at the evidence. Look at our politics. Look at our economics. Look at the amount of poor people on this earth that we don't even seem to care about. How can this humanity created so good in the image of God be so uncaring about so much? If the planet persists 10 more years, they say the whole Central Ocean will be one ocean of plastic. Give us 50 more years, and I guess the plastic will go all the way from San Diego to Japan. Doesn't that visibly tell us we're doing something wrong?
I have a few minutes left, and I have one more video to show, but I hope this has Richard's thinking and his words have helped you to think about maybe a new perspective on some things that perhaps in the past we've assumed, and maybe there's a new way of, or a deeper way of understanding. I highly recommend the Universal Christ as something to read. Now, some of you have been in touch with me through emails and other ways, and yeah, it is engaging to do this. It's what is this really saying? What's the fullness of this? I mean, this to me is, it's not you read the book and you get it. It's a book that raises new thoughts, new ideas, which are part of the perennial tradition, part of who we are. And I think that as but I mean of who we are, part of our tradition of faith as we live it out. So hopefully this has spoken to you, and let me know if this has helped you or challenged you or given you some new thoughts or questions you may have. Um, I want to conclude. I want to honor people's time. Uh, uh, it's not like we have to get off to the 11:15 service. That's usually it's usually why we end at 11, so we can move over to the 11:15 service. But I do want to honor time. People make a commitment of time, and we conclude around 11ish. I'd like to sum this up by a video that I want a little introduction. Is by Cynthia Bergeau. She is an Episcopal priest who lives in Maine, and also works with Richard Rohr at the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This video was recorded, I think, at the Center for Action and Contemplation, and she does work there, and she's just this insightful, brilliant mystic. I think was able to express things, and I want you to hear her summary of this work.
It's my joy to be part of the band that heralds the emergence and publication of our beloved colleague and teacher, Richard Rohr's newest and most sublime book on the universal Christ, a book he's been living into for all his life. And I have to admit that when I first heard him burbling away excitedly about this book 3 years ago, so when he first was making motions towards writing it, I rolled my eyes a little bit because the way I'd learned to hear the phrase universal Christ usually meant that what you did was you took the person Jesus Christ and sort of extrapolated all the moral and theological principles and then put it out there as a generic commodity that could be discerned in all the religions of the world. So the particularity kind of disappeared. It was like taking Christ out of Jesus. And what Richard did, and it astonished me when I finally had a chance to look at the manuscript, is that he's starting from a whole new place in his understanding of the universal Christ. That for him, the Christ is not this extractable and transferable theological or spiritual principle. It is the inside or the withinness of everything. He calls it the transcendent withinness that connects us to the universal through the particular in such a way that there's a constant kind of feedback loop between the universal and the particular. And as a matter of fact, he did my heart good when I was reading further in the introduction to the book the words, "A merely personal God becomes tribal and sentimental. A merely universal God never leaves the realm of abstract theory and philosophical principle. But when we learn to put them together, Jesus and Christ give us a God who is both personal and universal." And that's the extraordinary mystical reality that Richard is picking up and naming in this book in a way that rings and resonates with some beautiful things. The Tao, the inscape. I am the light shining within all things, as the Gospel of Thomas says, the inner light that the Quakers have known forever. And in point of fact, Teilhard de Chardin's beautiful sense that the consciousness is itself the inside of all outsides, the within of all withouts. And Richard draws beautifully the line between that's both universal and totally intimate, and Christ. And furthermore, I think the other thing that he does that's so theologically liberating and groundbreaking is that he looks at this extraordinary relationship between the whole and the part. And of course, the old question between particularity and universality is one of those old philosophical saws. But Richard doesn't set them up as an either and or, you have one or the other. He creates them as a symbiotic feedback loop where the whole becomes completely present in the part and the part becomes completely present in the whole. So that the ocean is in the drop as well as the drop is in the ocean, and it's a two-way street. It's a dynamic, symbiotic unity which becomes the drive shaft of all reality. And that's what Richard calls the Christ. So it's our dynamic bridge between the universal and the utterly particular and intimate, between the infinite and the time-bound, in a way that not only honors both of them, but puts them in a mutual bootstrapping whose final effect is love. This is big stuff. And I would beg you to look as you finally have the possibility of holding this book in your hands, to sense it as the capstone so far of a beautiful and faithful life mystically lived, and the mystical overflowing of a wisdom that I've seen coming from Richard with a force and a beauty that transcends even his own usual signature clarity, and brings us to a whole new place jointly. So thank you, and enjoy reading it. It will change your life, I guarantee.
Well, thank you everybody for being part of this this two-part series, and I hope our thinking and engaging with this can continue in different formats, different ways. And let me just conclude with a quote from the Universal Christ, it says, "I cannot help but think that future generations will label the first 2,000 years of Christianity as early Christianity. They will, I believe, draw out more and more of the massive implications of this understanding of the universal Christ. They will have long discarded the notion of Christian salvation as a private evacuation plan that gets a select few humans into the next world. The current world has been largely taken for granted or ignored unless it could be exploited for our individual benefit. Why would people with such a belief ever feel at home in heaven? They didn't even practice for it, nor did they learn how to feel at home on earth." Friends, that's one of our calls to bring about the presence of God here on our earth. We pray the prayer every Sunday. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I find it interesting the first 2,000 years referred to as early Christianity. We find ourselves so many years from this wondrous Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Christ who walked among us and who we put our faith. And these first 2,000 years perhaps are just the beginning of a wonder that is so much before us, and we are part of that. So thanks for participating in this, and look forward to engaging with you again in future sessions. So you take care of yourselves, and we'll see you.